Lee Strobel, author of a popular series of books defending the Christian faith, is arguably one of the most famous and influential Christian apologists on the market today. 4 of his titles have received Evangelical Christian Publishers Association Christian Book Awards. He's been a preacher, a television host, a much sought-after speaker. And admittedly, he does a good job when he doesn't venture outside his fairy tale world. But perhaps this emperor of the Christian apologetics circle has gotten too big for his britches. In fact, when Strobel ventures into the realm of biological science, we quickly learn that this emperor wears no clothes. In a video of a speech he gave, Strobel argues,
"There's a lack of convincing evidence to back up Darwin's claim that there's a common origin to all life. Of course, there's what we call microevolution. Microevolution just says there's a variation between different kinds of animals. And that's true. In my neighborhood back in California, we've got lots of different kinds of dogs. And that's a good example of microevolution, variation between a certain kind of animal. 200 different varieties of dogs."
Sorry, Lee. First of all, there is only one type of evolution. Evolution. The enormously popular and educational website Talk Origins puts it this way. One of the most respected evolutionary biologists has defined biological evolution as follows. Biological evolution is change in the properties of populations of organisms that transcend the lifetime of a single individual. The ontogeny, that is, course of development, of an individual is not considered evolution. Individual organisms do not evolve. The changes in populations that are considered evolutionary are those that are inheritable via the genetic material from one generation to the next. Biological evolution may be slight or substantial. It embraces everything from slight changes in the proportion of different alleles within a population, such as those determining blood types, to the successive alterations that led from the earliest proto-organisms to snails, bees, giraffes, and dandelions. Douglas J. Futuyama. It is important to note that biological evolution refers to populations and not to individuals, and that the changes must be passed on to the next generation. In practice, this means that evolution is a process that results in heritable changes in a population spread over many generations. So-called microevolution, or change within a species, builds over time. If these smaller changes add up to something more significant, and this causes reproductive isolation between members of a species, so that crossbreeding cannot occur, then science says something called speciation has occurred, and this is sometimes referred to as macroevolution, or the emergence of a new species. Nothing in nature, no known mechanism prevents cumulative changes in a population from causing speciation. Creationists like Lee Strobel, far outside their fantasy world of Christian apologetics, cannot name one biological mechanism which prevents speciation. And indeed, many examples of speciation have been recorded. Strobel's absurd example of dog breeds underscores his colossal ignorance. The many variety of dogs he sees are breeds. They are the result of artificial selection. Human beings have bred dogs to have the variety of features we see in our neighborhoods, and all those dogs are descended from a common ancestor, the gray wolf. The gray wolf and dog share a common ancestor further back in their history with coyotes, jackal, and foxes, and so forth and so on. What Strobel sees in his neighborhood is the result of artificial selection, changing the dog from its ancestral form in the gray wolf. Evolution, taking more time, does the same thing with natural selection. Nature selected certain traits in a distant ancestor which led to the formation of a variety of species, including the wolf, the coyote, the jackal, and fox, for example. There is nothing to prevent natural selection from doing on a large scale what humans have done with artificial selection on a small scale. Evolution has had billions of years within which to work, while humans have had only a few thousand.
But in the last 150 years, science has failed to substantiate Darwin's claims of macroevolution, which is that all creatures have a common ancestor, and that natural selection, acting on random variation, can explain how fish became amphibians, which became reptiles, which became birds and mammals, and so forth. Instead, the fossil record indisputably shows that the majority, if not all, of the world's 40 phyla, which is the highest category in the animal kingdom, virtually sprang forth with unique new body plans, fully formed, and without transitionary fossils preceding them.
What Strobel calls sprang forth actually took about 30 million years. This event is known as the Cambrian Explosion, which occurred somewhere between 570 and 530 million years ago. And he's mistaken, if not flat out lying, that there are no transitional fossils preceding those found in the Cambrian layers. Recently, minute fossil embryos dating to 570 million years ago have also been discovered. Even organisms that hadn't evolved hard parts, and thus didn't leave fossils of their bodies, left fossils of the trails they made as they moved through the Precambrian mud. Life was flourishing long before the so-called Cambrian explosion. But that doesn't paint the sudden creation event Lee wants his audience to envision. He wants his audience to have visions of God creating animals fully formed from thin air, just as the book of Genesis describes.
There's absolutely no evidence of this gradual evolution that Darwin predicted. In fact, if you were to condense the history of the world into one 24-hour period, all of these life forms would have sprung forth in a mere 60 seconds.
Cleverly, but you can only fool some of the people some of the time. The history of the world did not take 24 hours, and the so-called Cambrian explosion spanned 30-something million years, not 60 seconds. But your audience sure eats up that sort of deception, don't they?
Friends, the fossil record has just failed to substantiate these grandest claims of Darwinism. Darwin knew it was a problem, but he predicted under 50 years ago, he said, well, future discoveries will bear out my theory. They haven't. And when you think of Darwinian evolution makes the claim that a bat and a whale have the same common ancestor, would you not think we would have millions of transitionary fossils between those two? Growing into those two kinds of... We don't. Science has not found it.
Whoever said the fossil record was supposed to show an unbroken, perfectly smooth, transitional climb up some evolutionary ladder? That's a creationist distortion meant to dazzle brain-dead audiences. We're lucky anything fossilized for us to discover. Combined with other categories of evidence, the fossil record only supports evolutionary theory. What it doesn't support is Strobel's brand of biblical creationism. I'd like him to find in the fossil record something that supports the book of Genesis. Are there bunnies found in the Cretaceous? Can he find the descendants of Cain mixed in with those of a Tyrannosaurus rex family? Invest some time reading instead of writing books defending fictional stories, and you'll discover there is more than just the fossil record supporting evolution. There are many leads of evidence if the former law student turned Christian propagandist had cared to do a scientific investigation into the matter instead of trying to build just another lopsided case to sell his delusions. We have things including genetic drift, gene flow, and developmental processes that help us understand evolution. Things at the genetic and the molecular level, evidence which is conspicuously missing from Lee's lecture. Ironically, Strobel says,
the emperor of evolution has no clothes. And I agree. I agree. As Marx said, friends, this is not a faith versus science issue. This is science versus science. And I was forced to conclude that believing in Darwinism would require a leap of faith that I was simply unwilling to make.
If this is really a science versus science issue, why is it creationists like Lee Strobel refuse to do any real science? Why do they do nothing more than parrot the same creationist talking points which have been refuted time and time again? Who's not wearing any clothes, Mr. Strobel? Or are those merely old rags you have on? Hand-me-downs from creationists who have gone before you.